From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the daily news brief on Telesur English. And we begin this new edition right now. The 6th Cuba Caricom Summit is underway in Antigua and Barbuda, with climate change at the top of the agenda, along with trade, agriculture, and other areas of cooperation. The Secretary General of Caricom, Irwin Larroque, and Prime Minister Gaston Brown welcomed Cuba's Raúl Castro at the opening ceremony. Brown said that the Caribbean faces many challenges, especially after this year's hurricanes, but that it also has great opportunities, and that the friendship with Cuba is an important part of this.
The Cuba-CARICOM relationship is one of the region's greatest assets. It has been an anchor in a turbulent global world, bringing mutual benefit across a broad spectrum of areas. While Cuba has earnestly sought to address its own developmental challenges, it has devoted resources beyond its borders to tackle human development gaps in the wider region. Cuba has helped make our individual societies more resilient through its provision of access to world-class healthcare services, training and quality education, as well as assistance for disaster management, agriculture, and sports. For our part, we, the CARICOM countries, have not hesitated to stand up and to be counted in the effort to end the economic, commercial, and financial blockade which the United States government has imposed on Cuba for over 5 decades.
President Raúl Castro commended Prime Minister Brown on hosting this meeting, even after the devastation left by Hurricane Irma. He welcomed agreements between Cuba and CARICOM on disaster management and social development, and he said unity was more important than ever to demand a fair deal from the rich countries.
We should harmonize our positions to demand from the industrial countries fair actions conducive to the mitigation of and adaptation to the effects of climate change, especially in terms of financial resources and technology transfer. Additionally, we should coordinate our position with a view to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly to put up a united front enabling us to resist the domination mechanisms imposed by the unjust international financial system. At this point, I reaffirm Cuba's steadfast position to support, under any circumstances, the right of the small island states and developing nations to receive a special and differentiated treatment concerning access to commerce and investments.
Let's go to Antigua and Barbuda and speak to Annika Kentish, a freelance journalist who is covering the summit. Hello, Annika. Thank you for joining us. What have been the most important points of the summit so far, and what are we expecting next?
Well, as you alluded to at the top of the program, the fact that climate change is the main item on the agenda is no surprise. And this comes on the heels of major storms coming to the region, causing considerable damage and billions of dollars in losses. And so that is going to top the agenda. But they're also going to be looking at areas for further cooperation. For instance, one of the things that's going to be done, there is going to be, at the end of the meeting, a joint declaration. And we also expect that Cuban officials will sign an agreement with the FEMA, which is a regional disaster preparedness unit.
Yes, Annika, so we have heard a lot on talk on climate change. What exactly are the CARICOM countries and Cuba doing together to face this?
Well, the fact of the matter is one of the concerns that the islands of the Caribbean have where climate change is concerned is that we need to get a lot of the larger states and also a lot of the lending institutions to understand that even though some of the islands may be considered middle income or even maybe on the verge of being a high-income country, we are still prone to devastating circumstances like hurricanes. And as such, we need to be given some special consideration. That was a matter that was touched this morning by both Prime Minister Gaston Brown and President Castro.
Thank you very much, Annika, for your report. That was Annika Kentish from Antigua and Barbuda. So what does this summit mean for Cuba? Our correspondent in Havana, Laura Prada, has this report.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you. Indeed, today, just a few hours ago, started the 6th Caricom-Cuba summit in Antigua and Barbuda, which is co-chaired by its chairman, Prime Minister Keith Mitchell of Grenada, and the President of Cuba, Raul Castro. This summit will be focusing on special topics for the Caribbean, like climate change and risk disaster, especially taking into account after the hurricanes that strike hardly on the Caribbean in the last September. This meeting, besides this, will also be working on matters like solidarity, integration and development in the region. Cuba's President Raul Castro, after assisting to this meeting, will be making an official visit to Antigua and Barbuda and will assist to the Assembly of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. This is a small briefing of what have been happening until now. The summit will get back together.
Thank you, Laura. That was Laura Prada from Cuba. Now, in Venezuela, reporting restrictions have come into effect 2 days ahead of Sunday's local elections. The candidates closed their campaigns on Thursday, as laid down by the National Electoral Council. National and international mediators said that the country's electoral system is safe and reliable. 50 representatives of the Latin America Electoral Experts Council will be present during the process.
We have carried out this process in the middle of threats and attacks by those who don't believe in the vote as a tool to reduce political differences. Their attacks have been directed not only to the electoral institution, but also to electoral officials who have experienced the ambition of few people to take power at any cost.
This is a process where the hand of man doesn't interfere at any time. Just to write down this vote and verify the machine has accomplished his will. Subsequently, the minutes of the ballots and the transmission of the results are all automated, and the computer system is audited.
The Venezuelan electoral system is one of the best in the world because it's one of the most audited, and this is a guarantee for Venezuelan people who go to electoral centers knowing their vote counts and cannot be manipulated by absolutely anyone.
The Venezuelan Foreign Minister, Jorge Arreaza, has met the experts and welcomed any observations they might have on the process. Our correspondent Freddie Gillingham brings us more from Caracas.
So with less than 2 days to go until Venezuela's mayoral elections are set to be taking place, the last finishing touches of the logistics of that election are all being put in place here. The electoral electoral teams are being deployed. They will be joined by international specialists who arrived here earlier this week, who are set to be deployed to the 23 states across the country today. We actually joined the international specialists here at the Foreign Ministry building in downtown Caracas, where they are currently being addressed by Jorge Arreaza. His speech is obviously centered on welcoming the group who have come from all over the world. He's also given a bit of background information on the political situation in the country and why a democratic process is needed in light of an increasingly undemocratic opposition who have, of course, boycotted this vote. He urged the international specialists to come out and talk to people on Sunday, as obviously they're the most important people in this election, and he welcomed any criticism they may have to feed back to the foreign minister himself.
Freddie Gillingham from Caracas. We come back with more news in a minute. Stay with us. The Bolivian President Evo Morales has urged the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, to respond for the fraud in the recent Honduran presidential elections. Through his Twitter account, Morales said, "Evidence has shown a flagrant fraud in the presidential elections in Honduras. The coup-monger Almagro tries to wash his hands and protect the benefactors of dictatorship. He must respond to the Honduran people for the consequences of covering up this scam." The Honduran electoral authorities are recounting 4,000 voting tallies, as suggested by observers from the OAS, but they have not yet accepted the opposition's demand for a total recount. The country is still living under curfew, with over 500 people detained, 50 wounded, and 14 dead. More in this report.
Curfew starts at 8 p.m. At the time, in most parts of the neighborhoods and areas, residents are organizing to make noise and protest against the restrictive order from current president and candidate Juan Orlando Hernández.
What really motivates me is the fraud that happened in this country. We know the fraud that they did with the Social Security. That was theft. We're being fooled.
We're here because of the fraud that the Supreme Electoral Court is doing to the Honduran people. David Matamoros is going to be judged by history.
Residents from low-income neighborhoods know there will be repression and arrests, but they say there's worse things than that.
No, we are not afraid at all. We are afraid to be governed by people like him who want to remain in power without being elected by the people.
The government justified the curfew, saying it's necessary to avoid deaths and riots, but violence got worse after the first night of the curfew.
The responsibility of the military police, of the investigation headquarters, the national police, and any other type of police that participates in these detentions and repression is a criminal act, and it's also violating human rights.
For human rights defenders, the government's strategy to inflict terror to the population through the military, who fire on the protesters even inside their own neighborhoods.
These actions are simply to impose terror, to impose fear from these state structures to avoid the success of popular demonstrations through terror, like the ones yesterday, which were extraordinary throughout the country.
Most of the 14 fatal victims were murdered in the most distant areas from the cities and through ambush raids from the military police and organizations created by the current government of Juan Orlando Hernández.
In Argentina, a march was held in support of the opposition and former president Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who was sentenced and dismissed from Congress without proof. More details in the next report.
Social and human rights organizations marched to the Plaza de Mayo to protest against the persecution of the opposition and for the freedom of all political prisoners. It coincided with the resistance march organized every year by the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo.
We have to take the streets like our comrades did with Perón. We have to fight and not allow them to jail Cristina, because then they'll come for all of us.
This is persecution of political leaders, and of union leaders too, because they are also persecuting the unions that don't think like this government does. That's why I believe we have to be on the streets. We have to keep fighting. The resistance march starts here, this afternoon, but I think it shouldn't end until this government doesn't have anyone left who doesn't represent the interest of the Argentinian people.
Reactions came quickly after the request for the detention and dismissal for treason of the current Senator Cristina Fernández and other members of her government.
Without any proof, they are trying to turn a decision of the Congress into a judicial order, which is unheard of. Bonadillo is a very efficient figure for the Macri government. That's why his court is called the embassy. We know who he gets his orders from and what he is doing to execute them, precisely to divert attention and to persecute the leaders who are trying to oppose the adjustment policies of this neoliberal government.
Judge Claudio Bonadio requested the preventive imprisonment and the lifting of the immunity of Cristina Fernández in connection with the investigation into the alleged protection of the Iranians accused of attacking the Jewish Community Center in 1994. The former Foreign Minister Héctor Timerman, the former Legal Secretary Carlos Zanini, and the social leader Luis D'Elia were also detained.
This is clearly a violation of the rule of law. I think they're playing with fire. It seems like they want to provoke our people into violence so they can have an excuse to repress them. They're reaching a very dangerous point, in my opinion. In the words of Monsignor Romero, the murdered Archbishop from El Salvador, repression should end. We also expressed our concern, hoping this will not end in bloodshed.
Hundreds of voices are being raised to demand to be able to live in democracy and for an end to this harassment of those who think differently from the government of Mauricio Macri. They also reject the mainstream media coverage and say they will continue with this struggle for truth, memory, and justice.
Also in Argentina, social leader Milagros Sala was acquitted of all charges after a 3-year trial. Our correspondent Sabrina Roth has more details in the next report.
Finally, the second legal process against Milagros Sala has come to an end. She was accused of threatening policemen over the phone in 2014. At the oral court number 2, Judges Antonio Yeramos, Luis Ernesto Camada, and Mario Ramón Puig decided to absolve Milagros Sala of all crimes due to the lack of merit in the submitted evidence and the strong arguments the social leader's defense presented during the last leg of the trial. It's important to highlight that Gerardo Gastón Morales, son of the current governor Gerardo Morales, became a plaintiff attorney 10 months after the alleged facts and in the middle of his father's 2015 electoral campaign. Milagros Sala's defense described this trial as a legal sham and explained that this trial would have never happened if the names of the social leader and the governor wouldn't have been involved. Milagros still remains at Alto Comedero prison and it's waiting for the Supreme Justice Court of Jujuy to set her free.
Sabrina Roth from Argentina. In Chile, the right-wing presidential candidate Sebastián Piñera met with the Evangelical Church on Thursday to get their support for the second round of voting on December 17th. Congressman José Antonio Caz was also at the meeting, along with Pastor David Ormachea, who offered his complete support to Piñera's candidacy and criticized the current government of Michelle Bachelet. During the encounter, they discussed several topics surrounding the campaign's agenda, especially around abortion. Brazil's House of Representatives says it won't vote on the pension reform until mid-December, after reaching an agreement with President Michel Temer, as he didn't have enough votes to pass the new bill. According to the House of Representatives President, Ricardo Maya, voting will take place on December 18th. Meanwhile, thousands of protesters took to the streets to reject this reform that is looking to raise the working age to 40 years of contribution in order to get pension benefits. The public ministry and police forces of Peru have raided 2 offices of the Fuerza Popular Party led by presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori. A prosecutor is investigating Keiko Fujimori and her party members for allegedly laundering and extortion after accusations of receiving money from Odebrecht to finance her 2011 presidential campaign. After the raids, Fujimori denied her party is linked to any kind of corruption. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Across the Arab and Muslim worlds, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets on the Muslim holy day to express solidarity with the people of Palestine. In Egypt, hundreds of Muslims in the capital, Cairo, protested against U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Protesters burnt the U.S. and Israeli flags after praying in the Al-Azhar Mosque. The demonstrators chanted slogans saying Jerusalem belongs to Arabs. In Jordan, a huge demonstration took place outside the U.S. Embassy in Amman to condemn Trump's decision. Around 300 Jordanians gathered near the U.S. Embassy, bringing the heavy police presence. Demonstrators chanted pro-Palestinian slogans and held up Palestinian flags. A major segment of Jordan's population is of Palestinian origin and susceptible to any political settlement with Israel. Jordan lost East Jerusalem and the West Bank to Israel during the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. The protests and unrest spread to Syria, where Palestinian refugees in Damascus protested against U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition. Palestinians and Syrians living in the Syrian camp burned U.S. and Israeli flags and chanted slogans as they protested, expressing their solidarity with Palestine. Large numbers of Palestinians have been protesting relentlessly in different parts of Palestine. The protests are likely to intensify in the coming days. Our correspondent Noor Harasin sends us this report from the border of Gaza and Israel.
Since the day that Donald Trump decided to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and also recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and Palestinians have been calling upon each other to take the streets and set and protests and rallies against this decision to show that Jerusalem belongs to Palestinians. Yesterday, Ismail Haniyeh, a leader in Hamas, have asked the Palestinian people to go out and participate in the protests today, Friday, calling it the Day of Rage or the Friday of Rage. Also, youth groups on social media have asked people to head to the border between Gaza and Israel to clash face-to-face with the Israeli forces. Right now, I am standing in an area called Nah al-Oz, which is 300 meters away from the border fence between Gaza and Israel, and as you can see behind me, the people started coming. The prayer just finished minutes ago, and the people started coming to this area in order to protest and to clash with the Israeli forces. We witnessed the Israeli forces firing tear gas and also rubber bullets. The hospitals here in Gaza have declared an emergency status as they are expecting that today many casualties will arrive to the hospitals in the next few hours.
Noor Harasin from Gaza. Now let's take a look at our World News Roundup.
British Prime Minister Theresa May has struck a deal with the European Union at the last minute in a bid to move Brexit talks to the next phase. Discussions will now cover a transitional exit period, trade and long-term relations with the bloc. The European Commission President said it was a breakthrough, while May spoke about the guarantees for EU citizens.
The deal we've struck will guarantee the rights of more than 3 million EU citizens living in the UK and of 1 million UK citizens living in the EU. EU citizens living in the UK will have their rights enshrined in UK law and enforced by British courts. They will be able to go on living their lives as before.
World Power sent a clear message that the Lebanese policy of staying out of regional affairs should be adhered to and that foreign governments should not interfere in the country's politics. This after the meeting of world diplomats in Paris to rally support for Lebanon and its Prime Minister Saad Hariri.
Today's meeting must show the will of the international community to see the policy of disassociation from regional conflicts effectively put into place by everyone in the country. That's at the heart of the commitment made by the Lebanese government, by all the members of the National Council of Cooperation, including Hezbollah, non-interference in regional conflicts.
La non-ingérence dans les conflits de la région.
Zimbabwe's finance minister presented the 2018 budget on Thursday, which included a raft of business and investor-friendly proposals. The budget also included plans to tackle corruption and waste. The measures include the partial repeal of a law passed under former President Robert Mugabe that limited foreign ownership of local businesses to 49%. The $5.1 billion budget must now be passed by Parliament. And in the Philippines, a crowd of protesters led by a local urban poor group burnt an effigy of President Rodrigo Duterte to decry the leader's, quote, anti-poor policies. One protester said that Duterte uses violence to sow fear in the poor and keep them from fighting for their rights.
Let's go back to Antigua and Barbuda for more on the Cuba Caricom Summit. We are joined by Garfield Burford, the head of news at ABS TV and Radio. Garfield, thank you for giving us your time. What is the importance of this meeting and what concrete results can we expect?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for talking with us right here in Antigua and Barbuda. Well, the meeting marks 45 years of diplomatic relations between CARICOM and Cuba. Significant meeting because it is raising matters such as of regional and global importance, including climate change, adaptation and disaster risk management. These are key, absolutely, for your global audiences, because these matters have touched on both Cuba as well as members of the Caribbean community, CARICOM. During the past hurricane season, which ended just a few days ago, we had Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which devastated parts of, as you said, Barbuda, here in Antigua and Barbuda. One of the islands here was totally devastated by Hurricane Irma. There was also Dominica, which was devastated by Hurricane Maria. And both those hurricanes caused significant damage in Cuba as well. So this is a matter of common interest and importance for both Cuba and the Caribbean community. So these issues will be given significant focus during these talks. In addition, at the end of the discussions today, there will be a memorandum of understanding which will be signed between the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, SEDIMA, and Cuba's Agency for Civil Defense, and that will provide opportunities for closer collaboration, especially following the devastating hurricanes that we had in this September. So, of course, apart from climate change, there will also be issues of greater cooperation and collaboration on trade and other areas of technical cooperation. So significant issues being discussed at this forum. Plus, of course, they will also be looking at some matters which are not necessarily on the agenda, but emerging matters which have come up, such as what has happened with President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, as well as Brexit negotiations as well.
Thank you very much, Garfield, for your report. That was Garfield Burford from ABS TV in Antigua and Barbuda. And we've come to the end of this daily news brief. This and many other news, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.